people tend to think of Cook and those early voyages as being rather like themselves. And what you realise if you go back into 18th century England, it was a different world. And they were people that believed, some of them, in witches, and they weren't sure what they were seeing, you know, when they were the first people to come into some of these islands. And I think that changed Cook, for example. You know, somebody like James Cook that spent so long in the Pacific, being treated as a high chief when he was just a farm labourer's son. I think it changed him. And I think that happened to quite a few Europeans that spent a lot of time in the Pacific Ocean. My name's Anne Salmond, and I'm a professor of Māori Studies and Anthropology at the University of Auckland. So I'd spent a lot of time being immersed in Te Ao Māori before I started reading documents about 18th century voyaging. And so I was curious about the people on the shore, but because I was interested in the people on the shore, that gave me a different kind of curiosity, I think, about the people on board the ship. And I was always sort of looking back at them from the shore and trying to imagine what Māori were seeing. In the beginning, on the Endeavour voyage, it's really clear that Cook was an envoy of the Royal Society, and he had a Royal Society party on board with Joseph Banks and Solander and Parkinson. You know, they had that whole entourage. And I think that he was trying to be an Enlightenment captain. So he was trying to avoid violence wherever he could. He had the instructions from the Earl of Morton that recognised that Indigenous people had the sovereignty, if you like, of their own territories, and telling them not to use their firearms immediately and all that kind of thing. Taking Tupaia on board, the High Priest Navigator, and listening to his counsel, letting him pilot the ship through the Society Islands. But in that second voyage, some of his men in the companion ship were killed and eaten in Queen Charlotte Sound, Tōtaranui in New Zealand. When he came back in the third voyage, by then he knew what had happened to the Adventure's men, but he invited the chief, the rangatira, who was mainly responsible, into the great cabin and talked to him, and even had his portrait painted, and did nothing to punish him. Many of the Adventure's, their comrades, were on board the third voyage, and they really resented that Cook didn't do anything to punish the people that had killed and eaten their mates. And after that, there was a sort of outburst of, he called it mutinous behaviour, which he'd never talked about before. And the floggings doubled, and he was much more violent than he'd ever been before towards Polynesian people. He came near to being killed on a number of occasions, in Tonga, in Tahiti, and then finally in Hawai. What happened was, one of the small boats had been taken, and Cook wanted to get it back, and he went ashore with some of his men, and he woke up kalani o pu'u, which is something you would never do because their wairua, their spirit wanders when they're asleep, and if you wake them up and startle them awake, their spirit might not be able to re-inhabit the body, and tried to take him hostage. And you could see that betrayal of that relationship was the moment when the Hawaiians just switched on him. I think it was that betrayal of that relationship that led to his death.